Ladies and gentlemen, meet my daughter, a total waste of good genetics. That's what my father said into a microphone at his $25 million charity gala, in front of 300 guests. They laughed. They thought it was a joke. What they didn't know, I had federal agents on speed dial, a hidden mic in my sleeve, and 6 months of evidence proving his charity was actually a fraud scheme. And I was about to turn his entire empire into a crime scene. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my father's entire reputation in under 5 minutes, let me ask you something. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family? Not just embarrassed. I mean publicly gutted. Stripped of dignity in front of people who matter. Because if you have, then you know that specific flavor of betrayal. It doesn't taste like anger. It tastes like gasoline. And all you need is one match. My father is Dr. Richard Marcus, renowned plastic surgeon, philanthropist, the kind of man who gets his name engraved on hospital wings and park benches, the kind of man who shakes hands with senators and golfs with CEOs, the kind of man who, for 29 years, made absolutely certain I knew I was his greatest disappointment, not because I failed, but because I succeeded in all the wrong ways. See, I didn't become a doctor. I didn't marry into old money. I didn't produce grandchildren with the right last names. Instead, I became a social worker. And to my father, that was worse than being a criminal. Criminals at least have ambition. I was just pathetic, a bleeding heart with a useless degree, wasting my potential on people he considered human refuse. He said that to my face once. Human refuse. Like the homeless veterans I help are garbage. Like the kids I pull out of abusive homes are trash. Like empathy is a character flaw. For a decade, he didn't speak to me. 10 years. No calls. No texts. No birthday cards. I was erased. Deleted. A mistake he pretended never happened. And honestly, I was fine with that. I built a life without him. I worked double shifts, put myself through graduate school, lived on ramen and spite. I earned my master's in public administration while he was out there buying his 3rd vacation home. I climbed from caseworker to district manager to senior program officer for the state health fund. And he had no idea, because he never asked. To him, I was still that disappointing little girl who chose the wrong career. Invisible, irrelevant, beneath his concern. But here's the thing about being invisible. Ghosts walk through walls. Ghosts see everything. And ghosts? They remember. 6 months ago, I'm sitting at my desk, reviewing grant applications. It's tedious work. Budgets, projections, compliance checks. Most of it is legitimate. Good people trying to do good work with limited resources. And then I see it. An application from the Marcus Foundation for Medical Excellence. My father's foundation. I actually laughed out loud. The audacity, the sheer cosmic irony of it. The man who disowned me for wanting to help people was now asking me for $25 million to build a recovery center for the homeless. The same homeless people he called human refuse. The same population he told me wasn't worth saving. I should have recused myself. That's protocol. When there's a conflict of interest, you hand it off to someone else. You stay objective. You stay clean. But I didn't. Because the moment I opened that application, I knew something was wrong. The numbers didn't add up. The budget allocations were insane. 80% of the funding was earmarked for facility upgrades. Italian leather furniture for executive offices. Marble flooring for private lobbies. $300,000 for luxury SUVs classified as administrative transport. And you know what wasn't in the budget? Patient beds. Actual medical equipment, staffing for counselors or nurses. This wasn't a recovery center. This was a retirement plan disguised as charity, a tax shelter with a humanitarian marketing campaign. My father wasn't trying to help anyone. He was trying to funnel state money into his own pockets, while getting his name on another building. And I had him. I could have rejected it immediately. One email. Done. Professional. Clean. But that wouldn't have been justice. That would have been mercy. And mercy is something you give to people who deserve it. People who show remorse. People who acknowledge they've done harm. My father? He didn't even know I existed. He didn't know I held the pen that could approve or destroy his entire scheme. He had no idea the invisible daughter had become the gatekeeper. And that ignorance, that was his fatal mistake. So I didn't reject the application. I approved the preliminary rounds. I let him think he was winning. I let him believe the money was already his. I watched him book the Grand Marquis Hotel for his gala. I watched him order Chateau Margaux by the case. I watched him print invitations on embossed cardstock and hire a string quartet. He spent $100,000 on a party to celebrate funding he didn't have yet. And I let him, because I wasn't just going to take his money. I was going to take his dignity in front of everyone who mattered. The night of the gala, I showed up unannounced. I wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't invited, but I had every legal right to be there as the senior program officer overseeing his grant. I walked in wearing a simple black dress, no jewelry, no makeup. I looked exactly like what I was. A state employee, a bureaucrat, forgettable. I stood in the back of the ballroom while he worked the crowd. And God, he was good. Shaking hands, kissing cheeks, telling stories about his vision for the center, how he wanted to give back, how he'd always cared about the most vulnerable, how this project was his legacy. It was a masterclass in performance. The man should have been an actor. He almost made me believe him. Almost. And then he took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This center means everything to me. It's not just about medicine. It's about dignity. It's about giving people a second chance." The crowd applauded. They ate it up. He paused, letting the moment breathe. And then he smiled. That shark smile I know so well. "But before we get too sentimental, I want to introduce you to someone. My daughter is here tonight." My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected this. He pointed his glass of wine directly at me. 300 heads turned. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto me like crosshairs. "Meet my daughter," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "A total waste of good genetics. She crawls around in filth, taking care of society's garbage instead of carrying on my legacy. A tragedy, really." The room laughed. They thought it was a joke. Self-deprecating humor from a proud father. They didn't hear the venom underneath. But I did. I heard every word he didn't say. "You're worthless. You're embarrassing. You don't deserve the last name I gave you." And that's when I decided not to just reject his grant, but to burn his entire world to the ground. I stepped out of the shadows. My heels clicked on the marble floor. The sound cut through the laughter like a knife. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that feels like held breath. Like the moment before a car crash. I walked straight up the stairs to the stage. My father turned to me, his eyes narrowing. He expected tears. He expected me to beg for his approval, to plead for respect, to finally break after 10 years of being ignored. He expected the daughter he'd spent 2 decades bullying. He didn't get her. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was too stunned to resist. His fingers went limp. I turned to face the crowd. 300 faces staring at me, waiting for the punchline, waiting for me to cry or apologize or disappear. I gave them something better. "My father is right about one thing," I said, my voice steady and cold as winter. "I do work with the state's most vulnerable." But he left out my job title. I let the silence stretch. I let it become uncomfortable. I let every second press down on them like a weight. And then I dropped the bomb. "I am the senior program officer for the State Health Fund, and I am the sole signatory with veto power over the $25 million grant Dr. Marcus has been begging for since January. The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. The air was sucked out of the ballroom. I watched my father's face go from flushed arrogance to ash gray in a single heartbeat. I watched his hand open. I watched the wine glass fall. It shattered on the stage. Red wine spreading across the white floor like blood, like a wound that couldn't be closed. I didn't look at the mess. I opened the thin black folder I'd been carrying under my arm, the folder I'd prepared specifically for this moment. "Let's talk about this proposal, shall we?" I said, flipping the first page. A Center for Dignity Recovery. Sounds noble. Sounds compassionate. I did a line item audit this morning. I looked directly at the donors in the front row, the people who'd written checks, the people who thought they were funding a humanitarian project. 80% of the budget is allocated for facility upgrades, specifically imported Italian leather furniture for executive offices and marble flooring for the private lobby. Not a single cent is allocated for patient beds. I flipped another page. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Section 4. Administrative transport. $300,000 for 2 luxury SUVs. For a nonprofit. Serving the homeless. I turned to my father. He was trembling. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish on a dock. Gasping. Realizing the water was gone. "This isn't a medical facility," I said into the microphone. "It's a retirement plan disguised as charity." I closed the folder with a snap. "Dr. Marcus, your application is formally rejected due to gross financial mismanagement and attempted fraud. You will never see a dime of state funding as long as I hold a pen." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the speakers. Feedback screamed through the ballroom. I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the shock radiating off the crowd like heat. For 29 years, I had been the invisible girl, the disappointment, the failure. But tonight, under the lights he paid for with money he didn't have yet, I was the only thing everyone could see. And you want to know the wildest part? I wasn't done. Not even close. Because what I did on that stage, that was just the opening act. The real show was about to start in the hallway. And my father was about to learn a lesson that no medical school ever taught him. That power isn't about who has the loudest voice or the biggest bank account. Power is about who holds the pen. And I had been holding it the entire time. But before I tell you what happened when he cornered me in that hallway, I need to know. Do you think I went too far? Or did he deserve every second of what was coming? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happens next is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. I pushed through the heavy service doors at the back of the ballroom, leaving the whispers and shocked faces behind. The air in the staff corridor was cold and smelled like industrial cleaner and forgotten mop water. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the pure, unfiltered satisfaction of finally speaking my truth in a room full of people who needed to hear it. I wasn't running. I was walking with the steady, measured pace of someone who had just finished a job I'd been preparing for half a year. I just wanted to get to my car, to the silence, to the end of this long, ugly chapter of my life. But monsters don't just die because you cut off their food supply. Sometimes they get hungry. Sometimes they follow you into dark hallways. I heard the door slam open behind me. It wasn't a normal entrance. It was a collision, metal against concrete, the sound of fury barely contained in a human body. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy, frantic breathing gave him away. The footsteps that weren't quite running, but weren't quite walking either. The sound of a man who'd just watched his empire crumble in real time. "You stop right there." His voice echoed off the concrete walls, stripped of all its public polish. It was raw, ugly, wet with rage and something else. Panic. Real, genuine panic. I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I let him stew in it for a second. Let him marinate in the reality that his invisible daughter had just become the most visible person in his life. Then I turned. Slowly, deliberately. Dr. Richard Marcus stood 10 feet away. The impeccable tuxedo was rumpled. His bow tie was crooked. His face was a mottled map of red fury and sweat. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. His perfectly styled silver hair was falling into his eyes. He didn't look like a brilliant surgeon anymore. He didn't look like a philanthropist or a pillar of the community. He looked like a cornered animal. Dangerous, desperate, unpredictable. "You think you can walk away," he hissed, lunging forward. He closed the distance between us before I could step back. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His fingers dug into my skin hard enough to bruise, hard enough to hurt. "You think you can come into my house in front of my peers and humiliate me?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him with absolute clinical detachment. The kind of look you give a specimen in a lab. "Let go," I said. My voice was calm, flat. The voice I use with aggressive clients who think intimidation works on me. "Or what?" He leaned in closer. I could smell the vintage wine on his breath. Sour and stale. The Chateau Margaux that cost $2,000 a bottle now smelled like rot. "You'll write another report? You'll file a complaint? You ungrateful, treacherous little brat. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. And this is how you repay me? By destroying my reputation? By humiliating me in front of everyone who matters." And there it was, the truth, naked and ugly. I watched him unravel in real time, and suddenly everything made sense. For years, I thought he hated my career because it didn't make money. I thought he despised my choices because they weren't prestigious enough, because social work wasn't surgery, because helping people wasn't glamorous. But looking at the sheer panic in his eyes, the way his hands shook, the way his voice cracked, I realized I'd been wrong. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the grant. It was about the hierarchy. In his mind, he was the sun, and I was just a moon, meant to reflect his light or fade into the darkness. But tonight, the moon had eclipsed the sun. The waste of genetics had exercised power over the genius. The social worker had fired the surgeon. It was a narcissistic injury so deep, so catastrophic, it was fracturing his reality in real time. He wasn't angry because he was broke. He wasn't angry because he lost funding. He was angry because I had proven I was stronger than him, because I had authority he couldn't override, because the daughter he threw away had become the judge, and he couldn't process it. He couldn't compute a world where his victim had become his executioner. "Your reputation?" I asked, my voice still calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "I didn't destroy your reputation, Dad. I just turned on the lights. If you don't like what people see, that's not my fault. That's yours. You ruined everything." He shook my arm, spit flying from his lips. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I know? I will bury you. I will make one phone call and you will never work in this state again. I will sue you for defamation, for slander, for professional misconduct. I will drag you through court until you're begging on the streets with the junkies you love so much." He wasn't hearing me. He was doubling down, retreating into the only thing he had left. Threats. Empty threats. The kind of threats bullies make when they realize their power was always an illusion. He thought he still held the cards. He thought he could bully reality back into a shape that pleased him. He thought volume and violence could rewrite the facts. I wrenched my arm free with a sharp jerk. He stumbled back, surprised by the physical resistance, surprised that I wasn't afraid. "You're not listening," I said, stepping into his space now, forcing him back against the wall. "You think this is over? You think I just came here to embarrass you? To reject one grant application? You think I spent 6 months planning this moment just to make you look bad at a party? He glared at me, panting, eyes darting around the empty hallway like he was looking for an escape route, like he was looking for witnesses or backup or anyone who could validate his version of reality. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "But I have an insurance policy. You think you're smart? You think you can take my money and walk away? I still have something you care about." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The rage in his eyes shifted into something sharper, something cruel, something calculated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were still shaking, but his smile was steady. That wet, slick grin that made my skin crawl. The smile of a man who thinks he's just drawn the winning card. "You want to play the villain, sweetheart? Fine. Let's see how much you love your grandmother when she's sleeping on a park bench tonight." My blood went cold. He held up the phone, showing me the screen. A contact labeled Shady Pines Senior Living. His thumb hovered over the call button. "I've been paying for her care for 5 years. Did you think Medicare covered that place? Did you think she could afford it on Social Security? No, baby girl. That's all me. And if you don't walk back into that ballroom right now and tell everyone you made a mistake, that you reviewed the application again and it's actually approved, I'm going to call the director and tell them to stop payment. Tonight, they'll roll her bed onto the street by morning." He thought he had one. He thought he'd found the one button he could press to make me heal, the one pressure point that would make me fold. And honestly, for about 3 seconds I felt it. The panic, the fear, the image of my grandmother, 87 years old, confused and scared, being evicted in the middle of the night. It hit me like a freight train. But then I remembered something. Something he didn't know. Something he couldn't know because he never asked. Because to ask would require him to see me as a person instead of a pawn. "You see," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you have your little title. You have your clipboard and your self-righteousness and your moral high ground. But I have the one thing that actually matters in this world. I have resources. I have power. You think rejecting one grant stops me? I have a black fund, darling. A rainy day reserve. Money that you and your little bureaucrats can't touch. Money that keeps me comfortable no matter what paperwork you file." He laughed. It was a jagged, ugly sound. The laugh of a man who thinks he's outsmarted everyone. He walked over to a service cart that had been abandoned in the hallway. Someone's half-finished shift. He grabbed a bottle of the Chateau Margaux that hadn't made it to the ballroom yet and poured a splash into a water glass. He swirled it like he was at a wine tasting, like this was a social occasion, like we were having a casual conversation. "Look at this wine," he said, holding it up to the fluorescent light. $2,000 a bottle. Look at the lobster tails on the buffet back there. Look at the string quartet. Do you know who paid for all of this? The foundation. My foundation. I can write off a $100,000 party as donor cultivation. I can fly to Paris and call it a research trip. I can buy a Tesla and classify it as company transportation. I live in a world where the rules are suggestions and money is the only law that matters. You can't hurt me. You can't touch me. I am the institution. He took a sip of the wine, his eyes locked on mine, daring me to challenge him, daring me to argue. He thought he was untouchable. He thought money made him invincible. And that's when I knew. That's when I realized he hadn't just handed me ammunition. He'd handed me a nuclear bomb. Because everything he just said, I recorded it. Every single word. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen 3 times and turned it around so he could see. It wasn't a recording app. It was a photo, a high-resolution image of the gala's catering invoice, the wine list, the consulting fees paid to a shell company registered in his name, Marcus Consulting, LLC. I'd found it 3 months ago, buried in the foundation's financial disclosures. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through his arrogance like a scalpel. "You are the institution, and that is exactly why you're going to prison. He frowned. The glass halted halfway to his mouth. Wine sloshed over the rim. What are you babbling about? It's called self-dealing, I said, my tone shifting into lecture mode. The tone I use when I'm educating someone who should know better. And under IRS Code Section 4941, it is strictly prohibited for a private foundation manager to use charitable assets for personal benefit. No luxury dinners, no vintage wine, no donor cultivation parties that function as ego-stroking sessions for the chairman. You just boasted actually, that you used foundation money to pay for tonight. That's not a loophole, Dad. That's tax fraud. That's embezzlement. And when you combine it with the inflated construction contracts I found in your grant proposal, the shell companies, the kickback schemes, it's a RICO case. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had opened a valve. He lowered the glass. His hand was shaking so hard the wine sloshed over the rim, staining his white cuff red. Like blood, like evidence. I took photos of the menu, I continued, relentless. I took photos of the wine bottles. I have copies of the invoices. I have the foundation's tax returns for the last 5 years. I have emails between you and your contractors. And 30 seconds ago, while you were bragging about your black fund, I uploaded all of it to a secure server shared with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the State Attorney General's office. You wouldn't, he stammered. I already did. His face went from pale to gray, the kind of gray you see in corpses. This isn't a party anymore, Dad, I said, stepping closer. It's a crime scene, and you just gave me the confession. He stared at the phone in my hand like it was a weapon, like it was a gun pointed at his head. The swagger vanished. The bravado evaporated. The king of surgery was gone. All that remained was a greedy old man, terrified of consequences he thought he'd never face. You traitor, he whispered. No, I corrected. You committed the crime. I just turned on the lights. And then the panic twisted into something worse. Into rage. Into desperation. Instead of surrendering, instead of accepting reality, he grabbed his own phone and scrolled furiously through his contacts. His thumb hovered over a name. Shady Pines. Delete the photos, he snarled. Delete everything you sent. Right now. Or I stop paying for your grandmother's nursing home. Tonight. Right now. They'll roll her bed onto the street before sunrise. He hit dial. He put it on speaker. He wanted me to hear it. He wanted me to hear him destroy the one person I loved just to prove he still had power. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. And then a recorded message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. His face collapsed. The confidence shattered like glass. She's not there, I said quietly. I moved her last Tuesday. The Kensington. The good facility on the east side. 1 year, paid up front. Out of my own salary. The salary I earned while you were pretending I didn't exist. The story he'd invented about me, the one he'd been telling himself for a decade, disintegrated, broke, naive, beneath him, dependent, weak. None of it was true. None of it had ever been true. You never saw me, I said. You were too busy admiring your own reflection. I earned my degrees. I managed budgets bigger than your hospital's operating costs. I saved half my salary for 5 years. You assumed I was weak because I refused to worship you. You assumed I was powerless because I chose compassion over cruelty. And that assumption, that's what killed you. He slid down the wall. Slowly, like his legs just gave out. He landed on the cold concrete floor, his expensive tuxedo crumpling around him. Please, he begged. His voice cracked. Please, I have money hidden. Offshore accounts. I can pay you. I can make you rich. Just delete the files. Just tell them you made a mistake. I looked down at him. This man who had towered over me my entire childhood. This man who made me feel small and worthless and invisible. He looked tiny now. Pathetic. Human. I don't want your money, I said. I never did. I pulled out my phone one more time. I turned the screen toward him. It showed an active call. Call in progress. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. And a name. Special Agent Miller Barnes. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He's been listening for the last 3 minutes, I said. Every threat, every admission, every word. The phone dropped from his hand. It clattered on the concrete. The fight was over. The war was done. He'd lost before he even knew there was a battle. I walked away, through the service hallway, past the kitchen staff who were pretending not to hear, past the busboys who were absolutely going to tell the story for the rest of their lives. I walked out the back exit into the parking lot. Behind me, I heard shouting, then sirens, red and blue lights reflecting off the hotel windows, then the small, panicked voice of a man who finally understood gravity. So here's my question for you. Was I wrong to record him? Was I wrong to let him incriminate himself? Because some people are going to say I should have just walked away, that I should have been the bigger person. That family is family. But I want you to tell me in the comments, when does loyalty end? When does self-preservation begin? Drop your answer below, because what I'm about to tell you next is going to prove that being the bigger person is just another way of saying be the silent victim. And I was done being silent. Outside, the air smelled like rain. That sharp, clean smell that comes right before a storm breaks. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, just breathing. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the adrenaline dump, from the realization that I had just done something irreversible, something that would change everything, the kind of choice you can't take back, the kind of choice that separates your life into before and after. I got into my car, my modest little sedan that I'd bought used 3 years ago, the car my father would have been embarrassed to be seen in, the car that represented everything he hated about my choices. Practical, humble, paid for with money I earned myself. I sat in the driver's seat and just breathed for a minute. My phone was buzzing. Text messages, emails, voicemails. The world was reacting, but I wasn't ready to deal with that yet. I had one call to make first. I dialed my grandmother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was soft and warm. The voice that had raised me when my parents were too busy building empires and maintaining images. The voice that told me bedtime stories and taught me that kindness wasn't weakness. "Sweetheart," she said, "it's late. Are you okay?" "It's done," I said. My voice cracked. Just a little. Just enough to let the emotion through. "I did it. It's over." "And him," she whispered. She didn't need to say his name. She knew. She'd always known. She'd watched him discard me like trash. She'd watched him cut me out of family photos and family dinners and family conversations. She'd tried to bridge the gap for years before she realized he didn't want a bridge. He wanted obedience. "He can't hurt us anymore," I said. And it was true. For the first time in my life, it was actually true. The man who had controlled my childhood, who had weaponized money and approval and love, who had made me feel like I had to earn the right to exist, was gone. Not dead, but gone. Powerless. Neutralized. "Good," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. The weight lifting. "Come see me tomorrow. I want to hear everything. But tonight you rest. You did what needed to be done." We hung up. And I sat there in the silence of my car while federal agents swarmed the hotel behind me, while my father's perfect night turned into his worst nightmare, while 300 witnesses became 300 pieces of evidence. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not joy exactly, more like the ache you feel after cutting out a tumor, the pain of the incision mixed with the relief that the poison is finally gone. I want to tell you something that nobody talks about when they tell revenge stories. They always make it sound clean, like the villain gets what they deserve and the hero rides off into the sunset and everything is perfect. But that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. Because the truth is, destroying someone who hurt you doesn't make you whole again. It doesn't erase the damage. It doesn't give you back the years you lost. What it does is create space. Space for you to breathe. Space for you to heal. Space for you to exist without someone's boot on your neck. And sometimes that's enough. As I drove home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, drained, like I'd been fighting a war I didn't sign up for, and finally, the ceasefire had been called. My phone kept buzzing. I ignored it. Let them wait. Let the reporters and the lawyers and the colleagues and the curious wait. I needed silence. I needed to process what had just happened. I needed to sit with the reality that I had just blown up my father's entire life, and that I didn't regret it. The next morning, I woke up to a different world. My phone had 247 unread messages, 89 missed calls. My email inbox was flooded. The news had broken overnight. Local stations picked it up first. Prominent surgeon arrested for charity fraud. Then the state papers. Dr. Richard Marcus faces federal charges after gala scandal. By noon it was national. Cable news, Twitter, Reddit threads dissecting every detail. People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out. Some to congratulate me, some to condemn me, some just to say they always knew something was off about him. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a take. And I realized something important. This wasn't my story anymore. It belonged to everyone now. To the donors who felt betrayed. To the staff at his foundation who were suddenly unemployed. To the patients he'd treated who were wondering if their surgeon was a fraud in more ways than one. To everyone who'd ever been humiliated by a parent and wished they could fight back. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and started reading. The comments sections, the think pieces, the hot takes. Some people called me a hero, a whistleblower, someone who did what needed to be done. Other people called me vindictive, cruel, a daughter who betrayed her father over a grudge. Some said I went too far, that I should have handled it privately, that I weaponized my position for personal revenge. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong, because here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Revenge and justice aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're the same thing wearing different hats. Yes, I wanted to hurt him. Yes, I wanted him to feel a fraction of the humiliation he'd inflicted on me for years. Yes, I planned this moment specifically to maximize damage. But also he was committing actual crimes. He was stealing money meant for vulnerable people. He was using charity as a personal piggy bank. So was I wrong to stop him? Or was I wrong to enjoy stopping him? And does it even matter if the outcome is the same? I got a call that afternoon from my supervisor, Linda. She'd been my mentor for 3 years. Tough, fair, the kind of woman who'd seen every angle and didn't get shocked easily. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was neutral, professional, the voice that meant this wasn't a friendly check-in. I drove to the office. She was waiting in the conference room. Door closed, blinds drawn, the kind of privacy that meant either I was getting promoted or I was getting fired. I sat down. She slid a folder across the table. My stomach dropped. Was this it? Was this where they told me I'd crossed a line? That I'd let personal bias interfere with professional judgment? That I was being investigated for misconduct? "Before you panic," Linda said, "you're not in trouble. Legally, you did everything by the book. You identified fraud. You documented it. You reported it. The chain of custody on the evidence is clean. Your recusal wasn't technically required because you discovered the fraud before you knew the applicant's identity." She paused. "But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you know from the beginning it was your father's application?" I could have lied. I could have said no. I was shocked when I saw the name. But I was tired of lying. Tired of pretending. "Yes," I said. "I knew immediately, and I should have recused myself. But if I had, someone else would have reviewed it. Someone who didn't know his patterns. Someone who might have missed the red flags because they were buried under glossy presentations and big promises. Someone who might have approved it because they didn't have a reason to look deeper." Linda leaned back in her chair. She studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not a big smile, just a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth. Good, she said. That's what I needed to hear. Because between you and me, I'm glad it was you. I'm glad someone who knew his history was the one reviewing it. Because you're right. Anyone else might have let it slide. And $25 million of taxpayer money would be paying for Italian leather couches right now. The folder she'd slid across the table wasn't a reprimand. It was a case file. We've been getting calls, she said. Other foundations, other grant applicants, people who worked with your father, people who have stories, people who saw things but never said anything because they didn't think anyone would believe them. You opened a door, and now they're walking through it. I opened the folder. There were statements, allegations, a former accountant at his foundation claiming she'd been fired for questioning expense reports, a contractor who said he was pressured to inflate invoices and kick back the difference, a nurse who said patients at his clinic were being billed for procedures that never happened. It wasn't just one bad grant application. It was a pattern, a system, an entire operation built on fraud and maintained through intimidation. This is bigger than you thought, Linda said. This isn't just about revenge or family drama. This is about accountability. You didn't just take down your father. You took down a machine. And that machine hurt a lot of people. I sat there staring at the pages, at the names, at the stories, and I realized something. All those years, I thought I was invisible. I wasn't. Other people saw what he was doing. Other people knew. They just didn't have the power to stop it, or they were too scared to try. But when I stepped up on that stage and spoke the truth out loud in front of witnesses, I gave them permission to do the same. I gave them cover. I gave them proof that you could challenge power and survive, that you could tell the truth and not be destroyed. And that permission, that was worth more than any revenge. What happens now? I asked. Now. The real work begins, Linda said. The investigation is going to take months, maybe years. Your father's lawyers are going to fight this. Hard. They're going to try to discredit you. They're going to dig into your life, your finances, your relationships. They're going to look for anything they can use to paint you as biased or vindictive or unreliable. And they're going to find things. Everyone has things. The question is, can you handle it? Can you handle being a public figure in the worst possible way? Can you handle strangers on the internet debating whether you're a hero or a villain? Can you handle sitting in depositions in courtrooms reliving every painful moment of your relationship with your father while lawyers try to make you look like you're just a bitter daughter with an axe to grind? I thought about it, really thought about it, because she was right. This was just the beginning. The easy part was over. The hard part, the part where I had to defend my choices and my methods and my motives over and over again, that was coming. Yes, I said, I can handle it, because the truth is on my side, and the evidence is on my side, and every person he hurt who's finally willing to speak up is on my side. Let them dig. Let them try to discredit me. I've got nothing to hide. Good, Linda said, because we're going to need you, not just as a witness. As a consultant, we've got 43 other foundations flagged for review. We need someone who knows what to look for, someone who understands how these schemes work, someone who isn't afraid to ask uncomfortable questions. Are you interested? I didn't even hesitate. Yes. That night, I went to see my grandmother at the Kensington. She was sitting in the sunroom, reading a book, looking peaceful and content. When she saw me, her face lit up. I sat down next to her and told her everything. Not the sanitized version. The whole truth. The planning. The recording. The confrontation. The arrest. All of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached over and took my hand. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. He always said you had steel in your spine. He said you were the kind of person who wouldn't just survive the fire. You'd walk out carrying the people who couldn't walk themselves. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked, because I needed to hear it from someone who knew me, someone who loved me, someone whose opinion actually mattered. She squeezed my hand. Sweetheart, there's no such thing as a perfect choice, only the choice you can live with. And the question isn't whether you were too harsh or too kind. The question is, can you sleep at night knowing what you did? Can you look at yourself in the mirror and respect the person looking back? I thought about it, really thought about it, and I realized the answer was yes. For the first time in my life, I could. Then you did the right thing, she said. Not because it was easy, not because it was clean, but because it was necessary, and because you were the only one who could do it. I drove home that night with her words echoing in my head, the only one who could do it. And I realized that's what made this different from simple revenge. This wasn't about making him hurt because I hurt. This was about using the power I'd earned, the position I'd worked for, the knowledge I'd gained, to stop something that needed to be stopped. Yes, it was personal. Yes, I enjoyed watching him fall. But it was also right. And sometimes that's all that matters. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Not even me. Because 3 weeks later I got a letter. A handwritten letter. From him. From prison. And what it said changed everything I thought I knew about this entire situation. So before I tell you what was in that letter, I need you to tell me something. If the person who hurt you most in the world asked for forgiveness, would you give it? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? Drop your answer in the comments, because what I'm about to share with you is going to challenge everything you think you know about closure and consequences. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. That distinctive, precise script my father used for everything. The kind of handwriting they don't teach anymore. Elegant. Controlled. The handwriting of a surgeon who'd spent decades making incisions measured in millimeters. I stared at it for a full minute before I opened it. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Burn it. Pretend it never arrived. Because I knew that whatever was inside was going to complicate the clean narrative I'd built in my head. The narrative where he was the monster and I was the hero and everything was simple and justified. But I opened it anyway. Because despite everything, despite the anger and the pain and the decade of silence, I needed to know what he had to say. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on lined paper, the kind you buy from the prison commissary. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, less precise, like his hands weren't as steady anymore. Dear Chinmay, it began. Not sweetheart, not daughter, just my name. I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to respond. I don't expect anything from you anymore. But I need to write it anyway. Because I need to say things I should have said 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Things I didn't know how to say when I still had the chance. I sat down at my kitchen table. My coffee went cold. I read every word. And here's what he said. You were right about everything. The grant was fraudulent. The foundation was a tax shelter. I've been stealing from people who trusted me for years. The federal investigators have shown me the evidence. The paper trail, the shell companies, the inflated invoices. I can't deny it. I won't deny it. I did it. All of it. And I did it because I could. Because I thought I was smarter than the system. Because I thought money made me invincible. I was wrong. But here's the thing I need you to understand. The thing I need to say, even though it doesn't excuse anything. I didn't start out this way. When I first became a surgeon, I wanted to help people. I wanted to save lives. I wanted to make a difference. And for a while I did. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing patients and started seeing profit margins. I stopped measuring success by lives saved and started measuring it by zeros in my bank account. I became the thing I used to hate. And the worst part, I didn't even notice. It happened so gradually that I thought it was normal. I thought everyone did it. I thought that's just how the world worked. He went on. When you told me you wanted to be a social worker, I was furious. Not because it was a bad career, but because it reminded me of who I used to be, before I got corrupted, before I sold out. You represented everything I'd lost: the idealism, the compassion, the belief that helping people mattered more than helping yourself. And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand looking at you and seeing the ghost of my younger self. So I tried to destroy it. I tried to make you doubt yourself. I tried to make you feel small and worthless and stupid for caring about people. Because if you gave up, if you became cynical like me, then I could tell myself that I was right. That compassion is weakness. That the only thing that matters is money. But you didn't give up. You kept going. You proved me wrong. And I hated you for it. I had to stop reading. I had to breathe. Because this wasn't what I expected. I expected excuses. I expected him to blame me, to say I overreacted, to claim he was the victim. I didn't expect honesty. I didn't expect self-awareness. I didn't expect him to admit that his cruelty was about his own failure, not mine. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness, the letter continued. I don't deserve it. I'm not writing this to ask you to drop the charges or speak on my behalf or help me in any way. I know I'm going to prison. I know I'm going to lose everything. My license, my reputation, my freedom, and I deserve all of it. What I'm writing this for is to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. You were never a disappointment. You were never a waste. You were the best thing I ever created. And I destroyed our relationship because I couldn't handle how much better you were than me. You chose compassion over money. You chose integrity over status. You chose to help people instead of exploiting them. And those choices terrified me because they exposed how hollow my choices were. So I attacked you. I belittled you. I erased you. Because if I could make you doubt yourself, maybe I wouldn't have to face the truth about myself. The last page was the hardest to read. I know you're probably wondering why I'm telling you this now. Why I'm being honest now when I lied for decades. And the truth is, I don't have anything left to lose. The money's gone. The reputation's gone. The power's gone. All I have left is the truth. And the truth is this: I was a terrible father. Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved myself more. I loved my image more. I loved my success more. I loved being seen as brilliant and important and untouchable more than I loved being a good parent. And by the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late. You'd already moved on. You'd already built a life without me. A better life. A life with meaning and purpose and impact. The kind of life I used to dream about before I sold my soul. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to visit me or write back or acknowledge this letter in any way. I'm just asking you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you became in spite of me. I'm proud that you had the courage to stop me when no one else would. I'm proud that you chose justice over loyalty. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I made you feel like you had to choose. I sat there for a long time after I finished reading. The letter sat on the table in front of me like a bomb that had already detonated, and I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not reconciliation, but something close to understanding. Because the thing about monsters is that they're rarely born that way. They're made, piece by piece, choice by choice, compromise by compromise. My father didn't wake up one day and decide to become a fraud. He slipped into it gradually. He justified it incrementally. He told himself stories about why it was okay, why everyone did it, why he deserved it. And by the time he realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, it was too late. He was in too deep. He had too much to lose. So he kept going, and going, until someone stopped him. I want to be very clear about something. This letter doesn't change what he did. It doesn't erase the fraud or the theft or the decades of emotional abuse. It doesn't make him less guilty. It doesn't mean I was wrong to expose him. But it does complicate the narrative, because it's easy to destroy a monster. It's hard to destroy a person. And that letter reminded me that he was both. He was the man who humiliated me in front of 300 people. And he was the man who just admitted, in writing, that he was wrong, that I was right, that he destroyed our relationship because he couldn't handle my integrity. And both of those things are true at the same time. I didn't write back. I didn't visit him. I didn't do anything that could be interpreted as condoning what he did or minimizing the harm he caused. But I kept the letter. I put it in a drawer. And sometimes late at night when I'm questioning my choices or wondering if I went too far or feeling guilty about the devastation I caused, I take it out and read it again. Not because it makes me feel better, but because it reminds me that the world isn't black and white. That people are complicated. That someone can be genuinely sorry and still deserve consequences. That remorse and accountability aren't mutually exclusive. 3 months later, he was sentenced. 15 years in federal prison. No parole for the first 10. Restitution in the amount of $32 million, which he'll never be able to pay because all his assets were seized. His medical license was permanently revoked. His foundation was dissolved. The building that was supposed to have his name on it, they named it after one of the whistleblowers who came forward after I did, a former employee who'd been documenting his fraud for years, but didn't have the platform or the power to stop it. Justice, in other words, was served. Comprehensively, ruthlessly, exactly as it should have been. But here's what they don't tell you about winning, about getting justice, about watching your abuser face consequences. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. You spend years, sometimes decades, imagining that moment, imagining them suffering the way they made you suffer, imagining them finally understanding what they did. And when it happens, when you actually get that moment, it feels hollow. Because revenge, even justified revenge, even righteous revenge, doesn't heal you. It doesn't give you back what was taken. It doesn't undo the damage. What it does, if you're lucky, is create space. Space for you to build something new. Space for you to exist without fear. Space for you to finally move forward. 6 months after the sentencing, I got promoted. Senior Director of Grant Oversight and Fraud Prevention. My job now is to train other people to spot the red flags I spotted, to catch the schemes before they steal millions, to create systems that make fraud harder and accountability easier. I work with a team of investigators and auditors and analysts who are just as relentless as I am. And together, we've stopped 14 fraudulent applications in the last 6 months. We've recovered $8 million. We've referred 11 cases to federal prosecutors. And every single time we catch someone, every single time we stop a scheme, I think about my father, not with satisfaction, not with vindication, but with purpose, because he taught me, inadvertently, exactly what corruption looks like. He taught me how people justify it, how they hide it, how they build structures designed to avoid scrutiny. And that knowledge, that painful, personal knowledge, makes me better at my job than I ever could have been otherwise. My grandmother is thriving at the Kensington. She has friends. She takes art classes. She volunteers to read to kids at the local library twice a week. She's happy, actually happy. And when I visit her, which I do every Sunday, she tells me stories about her week and asks about mine and never, not once, mentions my father, because she understands something important, that some chapters close, that some relationships end, that some people choose themselves over everyone else. And when they do, the best thing you can do is let them go. As for me, I'm learning to live without the weight of his judgment, without the constant voice in my head telling me I'm not enough, that I'm wasting my potential, that I chose wrong. I'm learning that compassion isn't weakness, that integrity isn't naivety, that choosing to help people instead of exploit them is actually the bravest, hardest, most important choice you can make. And I'm learning that being overlooked, being underestimated, being dismissed as irrelevant, that can be your greatest weapon. Because people who don't see you coming can't prepare a defense. So let me leave you with this. If someone in your life, especially family, makes you feel invisible or worthless or like your choices don't matter, remember this story. Remember that the person they're dismissing might be the person who holds their future in their hands. Remember that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it sits in a government office reviewing grant applications and waiting for the right moment to strike. Remember that being the bigger person doesn't mean being the silent person. It doesn't mean accepting abuse or tolerating cruelty, or letting people walk all over you in the name of keeping the peace. Sometimes being the bigger person means being big enough to hold them accountable, big enough to demand justice, big enough to say no, you don't get to do this anymore, and I'm the one who's going to stop you. My father called me a waste of genetics in front of 300 people, and I responded by proving that genetics had nothing to do with it, that worth isn't inherited, it's earned, and that the daughter he threw away became the force that dismantled everything he built. Not out of spite, not out of pettiness, but out of necessity, because someone had to, and I was the only one who could. So here's my final question for you. The question I want you to really sit with. If you had the power to hold your abuser accountable, would you use it? Or would you let them go? Would you choose peace or justice? And is there even a difference? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better. And most importantly, remember this. Ghosts walk through walls. Ghosts see everything. And by the time they notice you, the checkmate is already set. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for sitting with me through every painful, complicated, messy piece of it. And if you're fighting your own battle right now, if you're invisible to someone who should see you, if you're dismissed by someone who should value you, hold on. Your moment is coming. And when it does, make it count. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right, you need to watch what happened when a daughter discovered her mother was stealing her identity for 20 years. That video is up next. Click it, because sometimes the betrayal you don't see coming is the one that changes everything. I'll see you there.